extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today. Today we will be recording, so if anybody has any aversions to be potentially on video recording or photos, please let me know. This will be on our website and on YouTube as well, I believe.
I'm not sure.
So if anyone has any aversions, please let me know. I'd like to introduce our councillors. So at the end I've got Councillor Robert Randall, Councillor Bob Lowry, Councillor Ricky Trenberth and Councillor Julie Elliott. We've got our staff here tonight, so we've got Rebecca Hayes, our CEO, Dion Watson, our Finance Officer and Deputy CEO, Damien Windsor, our Works Manager. We've got Gary King, who's blessed us with his presence tonight. He's our head outdoor staff crew. And then we've got beautiful Emma, who is our Manager of Environmental Services. So thank you. I want to say, first of all, a massive thank you to our staff. There has been a mammoth amount of work that has gone into this plan, on our changes, on our different decisions, and we've worked as a team to get that done. So I am going to hand over to Beck. She's going to give a presentation, and then we'll go to Dion, and then we'll open up for questions in due course. Is that better?
When we turn the light off, it might be clearer. Hello. How are you?
Hello, sorry about that.
Welcome. That's all
I was mulling up there.
You hang up on me today, Donald.
I couldn't hear you.
right.
All right, grab a seat. We're in the midst of the place.
Now, just so you do know, the toilets don't seem to have running water. If any of you are local to this particular facility and know how to turn the running water on, I'd love to talk to you very, very quickly. But but we'll get on to this because obviously this presentation and tonight's standing in the way of many of us getting home and cuddling up with a good book. So this is something I put together last year as I was, first year of being CEO, first annual business plan meeting, just to get an idea of the process that council goes through in regards to its budgeting and its planning over the year. And as you can see, there are significant steps that we have to adhere to. They're legislatively required. We have significant input from our auditors as well. And throughout the year, the budget that will be approved come later this month gets reviewed at least 3 times. The long-term financial management plan and the asset management plans all get reviewed. And whilst we're reviewing, we're also starting the process for the next year as well and preparing the next year's budget and business plan. So it's a process that just continues non-stop throughout the year. Most of that work falls with Dion, and a lot of it also falls into Damien and Emma's purview as well. And so just to back up Hannah's words earlier, a big thank you to the staff because it is an immense amount of work that we're required to do. Not only in this process, but the audit process and that ongoing transparency and probity that we meet. Hello, welcome. Just some of the impacts that we've had on our services this year. We understand that some of you might have seen that our roads are not at our normal high level of standard, and we don't want to make excuses, but our services have been hampered, and they've been hampered, one, by COVID, and I think you've probably all seen that across many businesses and many families in the last, especially since we opened up our borders. That sickness means that we've got staff off, and the requirements that they're off for at least 7 days means that it has had quite a significant impact on that staffing number. In fact, this week, Tuesday, was the first time we've had all of our staff on board, full capacity, all positions filled in over 8 months. So that has caused us some obviously some issues in regards to trying to manage our service provision in and amongst those people not being available. Staffing generally, and I think you've probably heard it, it's in the paper a lot, trying to attract people regionally. Whilst we do also hear, one hand, people are moving back, they want flexibility, they want to move to the regions. What we're actually experiencing is trying to fill positions is really difficult. Trying to get people to apply for positions and attract people isn't easy. This is not something that's just within Tumby Bay. All of the councils are finding the same issue across the Eyre Peninsula. So that's also caused some problems for us, along with a few people. We've had a few people leave the council this year, so we've had a few jobs that we've had a few gaps in at certain times. The storm damage and the weather impacts that we had in January, sort of February this year, got some pictures there of some of the damage that was impacted, and then recent storm surge damage across our foreshore with our guys needing to rebuild the jetty so that people could access the jetty and get down onto the beach. That's impacted our staff's ability to undertake their normal scheduled work. So we've had to stop that and quickly pivot to managing this storm damage, which they've done exceptionally well and exceptionally quickly and at a low cost to council. Increased costs, we see it every day. Many of us unfortunately have mortgages that are far too large, but increased cost of living is a huge impact, and no business and no household can actually get away from that, and we're no different in council. So we've found that the cost of increase, particularly being regional, that cost in regards to infrastructure and construction in particular has skyrocketed. So that has certainly created some impacts on services. Red tape, to be honest, I've never worked in a place so regulated as local government, and I've worked in territory government and state government, and local government is incredibly bureaucratic, and that requirement means that a lot of us spend most of our time reporting rather than the doing that we prefer to be doing. These are the themes which is part of the council's strategic plan. So I just thought I'd run through a few of the items that we've managed to address and achieve over the last year. We've grown our engagement with businesses. In the next 12 months, I want to start looking at a sporting complex master plan. That's a very long-term vision, but something that we need to start talking about. In regards to the foreshore, we're looking at workshops and options and opportunities moving forward, because obviously there's some work to be done there, and identifying relevant grant funding. Partnering with state government on long-term retention of our jetties. So we continue to work with DIT in regards to a business case that they're building for the Tumby Bay jetty, but we're also out for tender at the moment. I think it's actually closed to do some upgrade works to both Tumby Bay and the Port Mill jetties. In regards to community events, the Colour Tumby Festival was a huge success. Adelaide Fringe again. We've got the Qatar Festival this weekend, and we had it last July. We managed to get Illuminate here last year, which was fabulous, and we were the only small regional town to have Illuminate come and hold their show here. And we've increased our touring bands and shows for people to enjoy. Wellbeing, social inclusion, obviously the Youth Advisory Committee is key to that, along with some other plans. Diverse economy, so we've had some cruise ship tourism development, so that was nice to see. We haven't had cruise ships here prior to last year, and we've done some infrastructure renewal replacements and builds. So just a picture there of our new causeway, which is looking fantastic, and here's a great credit to Damien and the consultants that did that work. We do partner with state and regional agencies, so Tumby, Adelaide Fringe, Art Festival and Illuminate, key outcomes from that. And just some of the quality services and infrastructure, some that we've done. We just finished our causeway upgrade. We did the sandbagging on the foreshore. We're nearly complete with the foreshore footpath construction programs. So down to at the front of the medical centre and the hospital. Got the work coming up on the 2 jetties. We need to obviously plan for that foreshore upgrade, and we've got our annual resealing and resheeting of loads. So the 22-23 budget, just some of the, I suppose, what we're trying to achieve in regards to that budget. So it's managing those increased costs of doing business that, as we know, we can't escape. It's retaining all of the existing services at their current levels, so not allowing those increased costs to actually impact on the service delivery that we provide. Long-term financial planning. So between the long-term financial plan and this year's budget and the next couple of budgets, it's ensuring that we have sustainability in the back of our minds and making sure that the council is sustainable moving forward. In the next 12 months, we will be appointing a consultant along with the other 5 EP-based councils so that we can all move from a site value rating basis to a capital rating basis, and that's a requirement of reform of the Local Government Act. There are significant reform requirements that we are implementing, will be implementing over the next, already commenced, but over probably the next 2 to 3 years as well. So a lot of work in regards to that governance and implementation. We have a full election this year in October, November. So if obviously if you're interested in standing for local government, reach out to our current elected members and have a chat to them. But we'll be having some training and information sessions about that, but just bear that in mind. Voting packs will come out at the end of October from the Electoral Commission. Once we've got our new council, there's a lot of familiarisation and training that's required. We need to work through the strategic planning and the budgeting with them as well. So it certainly probably ramps up even more once we've got that new council to bring on board and familiarise them with where we're at and understand what their vision is as a council and as a group. Again, I've already worked through this. Our key infrastructure projects, probably the only one I haven't mentioned is a new council roof, because unfortunately we've had some significant damage to the current roof that needs replacement. So I think that was it. I'll now hand over to Dion, and he's going to get into the chunky meaty stuff of the actual annual business plan for you.
Howdy guys, thanks for turning up. It's good to get a bit of community involvement. Obviously quite topical this year based on what's already been put out there. I'm just going to provide a brief summary of the annual business plan, which there's copies there for everyone, and it's been on the website. I'm sure people are aware of it. So I'll just go through briefly what that sort of includes, and then at the end of that we can drill down to some questions around that sort of thing. That's what I would want. So obviously long-term financial planning, councils are obliged to have 10-year long-term financial plans. We adopted our long-term plan about 3 years ago, and it's a requirement that it's reviewed annually. Sorry, it won't be, you won't follow it on the pages. Yeah, just listen now and then. Yep. So the adopted plan is reviewed annually. The last review took place and was adopted, so it took place over 3 or 4 months. It did include a public consultation phase, not public meetings, but the ability for people to put submissions in, and then was adopted by council at their March 22 meeting. And generally we try and have that process, which includes the asset management plans, reviewed prior to starting the next year's budget process. So you basically reviewed what your long-term picture is, and then you drill down and you develop the budget for consultation based on that first year of that longer-term plan. This year, the long-term aim for the operating break even. So basically there's a lot of pressure on local government councils to have operating positions that in their long-term financial plan reflect an operating break even or better. In other words, you're generating enough income to cover your operating costs on a year-by-year basis. And a big part of that operating cost is obviously the depreciation. Councils have a wealth of assets, all of which have to be valued and depreciated over their lives. And the theory is that if you're reaching a break-even position or better, then you're raising enough money for the future replacement of those assets that are wearing out and creating that depreciation. So on that basis, council, their adopted plan had a date of about 29/30 to reach a break-even position. However, when we completed the last review, partly due to some external pressure, council revised that timeline and have now set a plan that they hope will return them to an operating break-even by 25/6, so 4 budgets time. And to achieve that, they're going to need to have a CPI plus 4% increase for those 4 years. That's projections. Obviously, it's a plan. Plans generally are a guide, but they don't work exactly as you plan them. What probably brought that point home to the council was this year when we were looking to construct the Graham Smelt Causeway, which was a project which was in excess of $3 million, and luckily council, it came around the time when the government were looking for projects for stimulus works. Council was able to get half that funding for that project from the stimulus program. Prior to that, we hadn't been able to identify any external grant funds, which meant we would have probably had to fund the whole lot. However, when we went to borrow that money, we got a bit of a shock from the LGFA when they said, well, we're not sure we're going to lend it to you at this stage because your operating position is not good and your long-term look of your operating positions over the next 7 or 8 years is not good either. So we got the LGFA out to talk to the council and explain their position. It was a change in philosophy from their organisation as to how they assess lending money to councils. And so council on the back of that, basically, when they reviewed their long-term financial plan, made the changes I've just mentioned. Asset management plans, so we have 4 of those. We have a minor one for plant, a bit more rigorous one for buildings and structures, and then significant asset management plans for all our infrastructure assets, which include the CWMS schemes, all the roads, footpaths, drainage, bridges, etc., etc. They are also adopted and based on a 10-year plan. The new requirement my understanding is that one of the new requirements in the local government reform is that they have to be a 10-year plan all the time. So at the moment we review it and every 4 years we'll update it to a 10-year plan. I think the requirement moving forward is that you're going to have to add a year on the back of it each time you review it, and that'll be the same with the long-term plan. So they are also reviewed in March. The only significant change council made was they took out a master plan project for works in Tumby Bay valued at $250,000 because they just simply felt they couldn't afford to do those works. They hadn't been earmarked for a specific project, but towards the master planning that had taken place earlier. As I said, they're reviewed annually. There's minimal new capital projects in that plan. There's some footpath work for the next 5 or 6 years, but that's only a nominal amount of about 40 grand. Council just does not have the funds at present and doesn't have the capacity to borrow to put new capital works in. And obviously, every time you build something that has capital cost, if it's 100 grand and it's going to last 10 years, your operating position has an extra 10,000 depreciation. So every time we add an asset, whether we get it for free or not, we have to then include depreciation for that asset on the basis that even though it was free the first time, it's more than likely, like about 90% chance it won't be the second time round. Asset renewals are also a critical component of those plans, and they're probably the most critical part of them. And they give the councillors, the public, and in particular the finance staff and the works department the understanding of when and how much asset renewal is required on a year-by-year basis. Obviously, with any assets, it's like replacing your car or putting a new roof on your house. There's an optimal time to do that work. And if you do it early, then you're burning money. But if you do it too late, then you're eventually creating a lot more cost to put that asset back to its usable condition. So council has adopted plans whereby they're trying to fund a 100% renewal ratio, so which means that they're trying to replace everything that we own at the optimal time to replace it. There's a little bit of manipulation there depending on how assets pan out, because it's all planning, and sometimes the road might have, you might say it's due to be done, but it's got a couple of years left in it, so that'll be pushed back, and another one might say it doesn't need to be done for a couple of years, but it's worn out, so you bring that one forward. So there's always a bit of manipulation, but generally what it says is that we know how much our renewal costs are going to be, and we know when they're going to occur, and so that puts you in a good position to plan for it. The annual business plan. So basically, as Beck said, some of this will be a little bit of a double up, but it aims to retain all the existing services at current levels. And we often get quizzed both by the elected members and the public of, well, if we've got no money, why don't we cut services? But when that conversation starts, it doesn't matter what service you think of, that service is valued by someone in our community. And so it's very hard to rationalise, well, what services can you remove that people think they can go without, and there's generally very few. The plan provides for some services to be provided on a user pays basis. So within the Local Government Act, you have the capacity to rate for particular services. So council in Tumby has a rate for both the Tumby Bay and Port Newell CWMS schemes. They are basically a rate that collects money just for that service, and that money has to be quarantined to be used for that service. So whilst you may generate surpluses in reserve for those particular items, you can't then grab that money out of reserve and spend it on something else, basically. It has to be quarantined for that purpose only. And the other one that works on that same basis is the Township Waste Collection and Disposal Service. So once again, it's only available to townspeople, and the townspeople are the ones that pay for it. This year's capital works budget is about 1.66 million, of which 1.53 is renewal spend. So pretty much all of the money we're spending on capital works this year is renewing assets that the public have become accustomed to having at a certain level, and predominantly that's road resheeting and road resealing. There are some footpath, there's a little bit of footpath work, which is capital, new capital, and then there's also both the boat ramp car parks are being resealed, which is renewal. Grants. So basically, all councils receive federal assistance grants, and they're based on a formula which is more complicated than I can explain, but basically it works on a number of different principles around your council, the sort of services you provide, your capacity to raise revenue, etc., all go into that formula. And then basically the federal government provides an allocation to each state, which is then split up by that state to its individual councils. Our council has actually been advised about 3 years ago that our grants commission, so there's two parts, sorry. There's the road component, which basically is based on a formula around the amount of roads you have and that sort of thing. That is increasing slightly each year. But the bigger component is what they call general purpose grants, and that can be used by council for anything. So we generally use it to just fund our operations. That grant in our case is reducing each year because it's believed, or one of the main principles is it's believed that we have a greater capacity to rate, and therefore we're probably getting more grant funds than we deserve. So that number is reducing slightly each year, about 3% they advised us. And also on the back of that, SA's population is shrinking, so our state's share of that funding that comes to the state in the first place is also getting lower it's becoming a lesser percentage each year. And in our case, this year's estimate is about 873,000 for those two grants. We also get an additional grant for roads to recovery, which is a Commonwealth program across the whole of the country, and our allocation for that is about 266,000. And we're also this year going to receive 697,000 under the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program Phase 3, which is one of the stimulus programs the federal government put in place. Council has elected to use that money for restoration works on the Port Newell and Tumby Bay jetties. And that's the tender that Beck talked about just before. There will be a change to our operating position because since we've drafted this second draft of the budget, we've now been paid in advance 520 odd grand of that money. And the way the accounting works, we have to include that in last year's books. So we receive it last year, so we get that extra income in our income statement last year, but then we spend it this year and it makes our books look bad this year but better last year. So that also happens with the Commonwealth grants, of which we receive 75% in advance this year as well. So that's, you're talking like 1.1 million variation in what the actual true figures are. You're still getting all the money, but it's very hard to explain to the layperson that, oh, well, that's, you know, there's this much dramatic difference because we've got money early. But that's the rules, that's how you have to treat it. Beck touched briefly on the strategic plan and the objectives. The plan that's out there, the business plan, actually highlights 19 strategies from that strategic plan, which council have identified for action in 22-23. So basically there's the objective and then there's a little blurb after that that just outlines what council's doing in relation to that particular objective. Significant projects, Beck also touched on that. So the council office roof replacement, that was actually due to be done last year, but because of inability of the contractor to do the works, it's now been deferred to this year. The road resealing program, which I think is a couple $100 grand, the road construction program, which is about 800 grand, and the other significant project, which will be quite onerous, is the rate review. So not only are we doing a rate review to look at what is the fairest system for imposing rates moving into the future, but we've also got to get our heads around using capital values, which is long in my time at Tumby Council, I don't think we've ever been on the site value. And we have no new loan borrowings envisaged for the next 12 months, so that's a plus. And from a rates perspective, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at a general rate increase of CPI plus 4%. Unfortunately, that has fallen at a time when CPI has started to go a bit crazy. Adelaide CPI up to the end of the March quarter for the 12 months was 4.7. So you add 4% of that and we're looking at 8.7%. The fixed charge increase will be a similar amount, so from 712 to 774. As an explanation, when we say our general rates are this much, in the Tumby Bay Council's case, we have two components to our general rate. We have a differential general rate, which is the 4 separate categories that we declare a rate in the dollar for, and then we have a fixed charge, which is the same for all those 4 categories. Those two amounts are brought together, and that's what's termed as your general rate revenue. All your other service charge rates now are over and above that. The CWMS service charge will go from 541 to 566, which is a 4.7% increase, and the township waste will go from 231 to 256, and that's based on our estimates to provide the service. So I think this year's, the year we've just started is the first year of a new contract, so there's been a bit of an adjustment there in relation to that. The final topic is rebates. So councils, the Local Government Act provides for both mandatory rate rebates and discretionary rate rebates. And mandatory rate rebates are basically ones like hospitals, what else we got? In our case, hospitals and churches, so religious dwellings and that sort of thing, not dwellings, but places of worship. Basically, we are obliged to provide 100% rebate for those properties. The rebate doesn't include service charges. So like where it's a church that's in Tumby, if they've got a CWMS connection, they still have to pay that fee, but they don't pay their general rate fee, which is the fixed charge in the general rate. And then this council also elects to provide discretionary rebates. So the mandatory rebates are about 23 grand and the discretionary are about 21. The discretionary rebates are provided by the council, and that currently in the plan for discussion is that they provide 100% rebate to properties that provide a community benefit. So examples would be sports clubs, district halls, RSL, art gallery, museums, etc. So where those clubs or organisations own the property, council chooses to give them 100% rebate on the general rates. Once again, they still pay the service charges. That's about it.
Excellent. Oh, nice. Thank you, Beck and Dion. That was pretty heavy, I think, for those of you who haven't delved into it. It hasn't been a big part of your life the last 6 months, I guess. I am going to open up the questions. I just want to probably, if you can just really minimalise it down to one question, 1 or 2 questions. I do want us to all get home to our families at a reasonable hour. I also want to avoid any questions that aren't directed to the draft annual business plan tonight. And also, in due course, we will do public consultation about the change to capital value rating system, but I just don't want any questions about that tonight. So I hope everyone understands that. That's all going to be in due course, but tonight we're here for the draft annual business plan and budget, so that's where I want the questions to come from. So,
you've raised it in here already.
What's that?
You put that on the table already in here in the document that should be discussed. You put capital values in your document, this document we're looking at tonight, so it should be discussed or considered.
Yeah.
That's been put in there obviously as a project that will need to be handled this year. It's obviously something we have to do. The state government's enforcing that, but we're appointing a consultant who will do a lot of work in and around the rating basis. They'll work with council. They'll do significant public consultation at the same time. We can't answer questions tonight in regards to the impacts of that change. We don't have that information. We certainly haven't looked at it. So I think questions in and around that, you know, if you want to talk about the tender for the consultant, I can talk about that, but we can't talk about the impact of that change because we just simply don't have that information.
Thanks, Beth. So I'm opening up the questions now. Has anyone got any questions?
Yes, Hartley Modder here.
Hartley, thank you. Sorry, I can't find your name.
On the cost for road grading, where do you include that here, Dion? You've got it under general.
So it'd be under the transport section. And I think currently this year it was about 288,000. Does that sound right, Damien? Or not? I can get the number out.
Okay. I just asked that question in relation to the fact that it's one of the few services we're able to get out here in the country, and it's pretty important from the point of view when we're driving around our district and that we need to be able to access the properties on a reasonable road of a reasonable standard.
Yep. So just as way of explanation, when a council does its budget, we basically work out what everything's going to cost from a cash perspective. But when we finalise that budget, we have to actually allocate all our other costs that go against those types of services. So to give you an example, with patrol grading, that will have overheads allocated to it based on the fact that the men work at the depot costs us money, so a percentage of that money gets charged to patrol grading. So the cash number is totally different than the full cost, but the full cost is a more true indication of what the service actually costs to provide by the council.
Do you have that down to like a cost per kilometre or to maintain?
And Damien may be able to provide that information. I certainly don't have it. I can tell you what the total cost is envisaged for the next 12 months.
It's a changing feast. About fuel prices.
Yeah, well, that's an issue.
So this year's budget basically has, last year the full cost was 389,000. This year it's estimated to be 441.
That's for 1,000 kilometres of roads.
We have about 1,050 kilometres of dirt roads, and they're across 4 different categories, obviously requiring different levels of standard service. Yeah.
Thanks, Hartley. Have you got anything else to say?
Well, just on that, look, just recently you've graded some roads around here, and it's fantastic when they're graded in a good condition. That's really good.
Yeah.
It's just after harvest time, particularly when it's really rough on that, when they use a lot, and we've got to drive a lot on those roads. Some people, I'm surprised more people don't complain about the fact that they're rough and they're hard on equipment.
Yeah, so, it is, but it's also hard to be able to get the grader over those roads in the right conditions after harvest. The roads aren't soft enough and all those sorts of things. But it needs to be the right condition, and we can only get so many roads done up at one time. So
I guess just as a further explanation for that, obviously everything we do, we try and do it in the optimum way. So to gain the best efficiency and the best long-term outcome. And to grade dry roads, as most people in the room would be aware, is a futile exercise, because basically the fines just blow and get washed straight out by the vehicles. So ultimately, if we can, we like to do it after the roads have been dampened. And we only have 3 graders, so we can only get 3 out there at a time. We do sometimes contract in as well, but once again, it's around what's available in the budget and the most efficient way to spend that money.
So Dion, just on that, I don't want to hold all the questions, do you have a plan like you grade the main roads 2 or 3 times a year, or just once?
Yeah, Damien could probably elaborate better if he wants to on that, how we manage that side of it.
We don't have a set number of grades for any particular road or road category. We do inspect them and respond to condition as best we can, simply because we can't afford to be grading road just because our calendar says it's due for grade. We don't have money to do it just because the calendar says. We do it when it needs it, as close as we can, taking into account the category of the road and how important it is in the network.
Thank you, Damien. So moving on from roads, have we got any more questions?
I'd like to raise the different categories of rates and how those rates were established and why they were established.
Sure. Dion, did you want to speak on that one?
I can try and give an explanation. So council has at its disposal a multitude of different ways in which they can rate the public. This council some years ago chose to use the philosophy of having differential general rates. So a differential general rate can be applied according to the locality or the use or the land use code of the land, or a combination of both. This council believed that because obviously rural people receive a different basket of services than townspeople, but you can never say these people receive this service and these receive that, because there's obviously a crossover on a lot of them. And some people use service a lot and some people won't use it at all. However, in determining that, council split into what they believe were 4 categories. So the one for the silos, for example, was basically a carryover from when the silos were rated based on capacity of grain. And this council reached agreement with, I think it was, who knows, I've changed their name that many times, but reached agreement with the company at the time that they would be, because it went back to based on site value for them as well, and they agreed that they'd be happy to pay a higher rate. And to make that happen, council changed their development plan to include a zone that picked up the silos only, so we could rate that zone. So that's one of the reasons. I think about 8 years ago, council elected to introduce a differential rate for commercial industrial properties, along with the 2 for township and what you call is rural, I guess. The rest, it's really everything else, basically, is what it says in the adoption of those. And I guess council at a given point in time, whether that was 8 years ago or prior to that, they had a mix of where those rates came from. Prior to that 8-year period, there was a council that for a couple of years worked to change that proportion of the rates, and that happened for a couple of years. But since that, about that 8-year mark, council have elected to increase their general rates by the same percentage in each of those categories. And that's what is proposed in the current plan this year, to increase that rate by the same amount. Now, obviously, with a major rate review happening next year around capital values, which, if for those that don't fully understand, capital value means that your rate would be applied against the total value of your property. So your land, your house, your shed, your fences, etc. Site value, or in a farm, land, more sheds, houses, fences, etc. Site value just values the land. So if you look at, I'll give an example, if you look at my block, my house is probably worth 400 grand, I suppose. The block's probably worth 80 grand. So for my factor, we're using $80,000 to assess my rates. Whereas in a farm situation, you're probably looking at, and I'm guessing here, but I think it'd be reasonably close, 80% of their value is their land and 20% might be their improvements. So we're using a value of 80% of what their property's worth. And therefore, if you have the same rate in the dollar, that's extremely unfair. So council has differing rates in the dollar to balance that.
But the divergence is quite marked. It's more than 3 times from rural to town road.
That's correct, yep.
Is that considered fair? Considering you are scratching for money, the figures you put on this document and other documents show that this council is in debt terribly badly. Like, you're not doing a really good job in managing the
Well,
funds,
in
and
actual,
you should be looking for any avenue to build your revenue base and to minimise your costs. I see a lot of focus here on the rate increases, very little on the minimisation of costs.
okay, so in relation to debt, we're actually in quite a good debt position. We have minimal debt, as in loans, in accordance with capacity for local government to borrow money. And okay, you might look at the numbers and think, well, that seems like a lot of debt to me, but in local government spheres, our debt level is considered to be quite low. That's just the industry standard. From a perspective of, what was the other points you made?
What I said was that your debt level, if it was a private enterprise business, you'd be trading insolvent.
Yes, but we're not, and we have debt our major debt is related to our common effluent schemes, which are guaranteed rate income, which were set up to cover the cost of loan repayment and service delivery. And so, I mean, I can.
The local government has already said to you that your credit rating is so bad they wouldn't give you a loan.
At the same time, they've said our debt level is quite manageable.
Well, that's
Just what you're saying there. Back in 2011, 12, 13, the rural rate and the residential rate were exactly the same. And Griffith Council got in as the rural people, they raised the residential rate and lowered the rural rate. It's been snowballing like that ever since. And the rural valuations are skyrocketing, yet we're not rating enough. And the local government grants commission came to council and told us one of the reasons why we've got our rates, our grants commission cut, because we had more ability to rate our rural people and we're not doing it.
That's exactly where I'm going.
I know, I'm just saying, I'm just
Thank
what
you,
you're saying.
Councillor Lowe, thank you.
That's a policy issue and stuff.
It is a policy issue.
So
I
it's an
think-
elected member question.
I think everyone needs.
It's not a policy,
No,
he wants
it-
to talk about it, so why don't you talk about it?
I didn't know.
I've
You've shut me down
answered.
twice. You
I've
shut me
I
down
know.
on-
Can I please speak?
Yes.
I think we have to remember that this is a draft. It says draft, it is a draft. We're here to hear what our community have to say. And we want to read your submissions, we want to understand, but we also don't want it to be an attack either.
It wasn't an attack.
Yeah, it's open discussion.
No, but I'm not saying that it was, but we have received attacks in the past. Other councillors have received attacks. And so I'm just reminding everyone to be respectful. We all have our decisions, we're all here to listen. All right, thank you.
Okay, so just to reiterate, our level of debt is not considered high. However, our capacity to borrow more money is limited by the fact that we have forecast operating deficits. Hence the reason for increasing the rate to try and alleviate and get back to a break-even position. And as I mentioned earlier, on services that are provided, this council doesn't provide many luxury services. We pretty much provide core service levels. And I'm yet to have people come to me and say, this is a service we can do without, which we think we should take away. And some people may believe we need less staff or whatever to deliver the services. That's just not a fact. To deliver the services we provide now, we are scratching at the bare minimum of staffing levels to meet those requirements. So it's either you take something away if you don't want to pay more rates, or you continue to pay an increased level of rates to meet the true cost of providing those services. That's about the best explanation I can give. I don't make a decision on the policy of why we rate this sector versus that sector. I'm just explaining the financial position.
Thank you, Dan. Have we got any further questions?
You commented on not capital rate, but site value.
Yep.
Is that based on position?
Well, no, the valuer general basically provides council with a valuation for all properties which are effective from the 1st of July each year. They would take into account, when they do that, they would take into account like historical sales data and things like that. I don't know exactly how they do it, but basically it's what they believe the land is worth if it was sold without any improvements on it. So obviously if it's a block of land the same size in Tumby Bay as in Lipson, you would imagine the piece in Tumby would be worth more.
Yeah.
It's got more services surrounding it.
Yeah, why I brought that up is because the neighbour's property is less than what mine is.
So
And they're exactly the same size.
if you have an issue with your valuation, then you can raise that with the Office of the Valuer General,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you can actually
Talking about me,
put something.
yeah, I am
there.
talking about you.
The council doesn't have any capacity to change those values. That rests with the value.
Yeah, well, it's not worth now anyway, because we're going to change capital value anyway.
Yeah.
But
And-
I just wanted to commend council on this road that they've done here.
Yeah.
But
Thank you, sir.
it's excellent, but I think on that western end, they've got too much clay in that soil that they put on there. Unless that,
You've been pouring it.
We're going to have trouble.
Yeah, it's a really good example of how the same material out of the same borrow pit has still got variability in it. You know, yeah, when the operators put it down, they probably would have said it was the same material all the way through. Obviously, it's got different properties and it's formed differently. And we have got some money to finish that job, so we will come back and work on it what we can to try and get a better result.
Just
Amazing.
Just in evaluations, as you know, we're going to capital value.
Yeah.
Just check the emergency services, that'll tell you what the capital value is, the council rate will tell you what the site value is. If you're not happy with it, get in touch with the valuation department, because your place is going to be a major problem, partly is going to be a problem.
Yeah, I
when
know
you go to
that.
Capital value.
Yeah,
If you don't fix it now, it's going to be a headache 2 years down the track.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Councillor Lauren. Donald, did you have a
Yes.
question?
Yes, thanks, Hannah. I just would really like to debunk the theory that the town people are subsidising farmers when you've got 37% of farmers paying 54% of the rates and 58% of the town people paying 41% of the rates. So where this idea comes from that we're subsidising, town people subsidising the rural rate pays, I don't know. Anyway, I'll talk about it to you later. But Hannah, I've had several ratepayers ring up and they want some points raised. Can I do that?
Yep.
It's to do with the
Are
budget.
they questions or are they points?
They are points.
I would actually just encourage them to send them in submissions, if that would be okay. Because we are here for questions
Well,
tonight.
I could put it in a question.
I'd love a question. I am a question girl. I would love a question, please.
Firstly, I'd like to congratulate Dion. I think we're very lucky to have Dion.
So lucky to have the team that we have.
But the big question is, and Dion's mainly answered on this, has come from ratepayer, about reducing operating costs. We've all talked about and reviewing or reducing services or service levels. Obviously, we're going to look at that, and Dion's kind of touched on that all the time trying to do that. The amalgamation of lower air, maybe. I know we looked at shared services when I was on council and this type of thing. I don't know, question whether that's still going to be looked at.
It's certainly a discussion that we always have around the table at EPLGA board meetings and things like that. I don't think it's ever going to go away. And I think it probably is in our future. When, I don't know. I don't have that crystal ball, but I do think that it probably is the right way for local government, for the whole state in different ways to look at amalgamation.
Just on that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and thanks, just want to add to that as
Can
well.
I just add to that answer? So from an EP-wide perspective, the 11 councils have recently gone through a process of looking at shared service opportunities. They've been in some specific areas and we're continuing to work on those. Tumby will probably fall outside of that to a certain extent because of the manner in which our staffing structure is already quite lean and what we've got in place. But I'm also working with Lower Air and Lincoln councils at another opportunity for us to work together and to hopefully achieve some of those efficiencies as well. So it's certainly something that from a CEO perspective, we're constantly
When I was
considering.
on council, we spent $70,000, and Dion can back it up, having 2 people come out from Adelaide and look how the 3 councils could share services.
Yeah.
Which all came to very little. I think it's just too hard for us.
Yeah, we are still working towards some of them. We do have some shared service arrangements, like we use a consultant from the City of Port Lincoln to do our work health safety, for example, so that's a shared position. What I will say in relation to that question is that small councils don't have economy of scale. So to give you a couple of examples, the license fees that we pay for our software is very similar to what Lower Air pay. They might pay maybe 10% more, but they're probably 40 or 50% bigger. You know, there's so many examples of those sorts of things. For example, the reform includes that the SCOSA are going to look at our annual business plan every 4 years. Every council has to pay $52,000 towards that cost, regardless of size. So a small council pays $52,000, which in our case is more than 1% of rates, and Adelaide Metro Council pays $52,000. So those economy of scale, we just don't have. You know, it's, I don't know the answer to that.
From this ratepayer, LTA procurement to do an independent audit to identify potential savings in leveraging of other local governments. This is a question that the person asked.
I think Beck might need to answer that one. I don't think I have the depth on that one.
Well, at the moment, LGA procurement provide an extensive range of services which we can procure through their service. And those services are generally discounted because of that fact, because they are on an approved list through LGA procurement, and Damien certainly uses that service, I believe, a lot more than a lot of other councils do in every camp.
If I'll allow another question from this ratepayer.
Yep, and then we might move on to the next
I
person.
know, sorry. Leasing and plant and equipment. And Dion's kind of touched on that when he was saying, look at the cheapest way to get our machinery. And I know you would have, when I was at council, comparison leasing, buying, I think we decided at least that.
Well, I think the hard part with it is we obviously don't lease for tax benefits like a lot of businesses do. And you can, if you go into leasing and you get rid of all your plant and leasing becomes cost prohibitive, you've then got to buy back into owning all your plant again. So it's never always this one's cheaper than the other one. It's swift, it changes.
That's what we've yeah. I better not hold on.
Yeah,
four other questions for other
I'm
people.
going to move it on to the next person. Have I got some more questions from the room?
When you're resheeting roads, does council put out a tender?
I'd have to pass that one on to Damien if you're happy to take that one.
A lot of the work is done in house, so using council labour and council equipment, and we haven't intended that in the past. We have contractors involved in raising and crushing material and carting the haulage of material, and they are tendered contracts.
Thank you. Has we got some more questions?
I want to say something.
Go for it.
I've got a bit of experience with local government, but I wanted to basically say I commend Tumby Council staff and councillors for a very hard job that they have to do, because I don't believe your rate base is big enough to keep you being viable. And so I suppose it's a reality of life now. We're as Becca has mentioned, you know, there's a lot of red tape. Most of it's from state government, which you can't do anything about. Local government is fortunate in having community people, ratepayers themselves, actually come in front of them and ask questions like this. We don't get that opportunity with state government or federal government. So I think I wanted to just really say I commend staff and councillors for the job they're doing in a very difficult world, and it's getting harder. And I guess my question has sort of been asked by Don, because I was really thinking, you know, how can there be some improvement to the viability of these small councils on the Eyre Peninsula? And I know it's statewide, but nationally, really, I know that. But Eyre Peninsula local government needs to really take a strong leap in that direction. And I guess the chair or the mayor and the CEOs are trying to work on that, but I think they need to push a bit more. And who knows what can happen, because it's, I mean, even though Dion's saying there's a break even or better position, you know, by 25-26 financial year, there's going to be curveballs coming at you left, right, and centre.
Within 3 months of adopting this plan, something significant will change.
So, you know, it's wonderful to have that as an aim, but it's not in reality.
But like we say, they're a plan, and they differ and they change, and we roll with the punches.
That's right.
Just on that, Wendy, because we're on site value right now, until we move to capital value, we won't really know that we are raising the appropriate amount of rates or more rates than probably what we should be. So it'll be interesting when we go through that process to find out if that is in fact the case, that we are unviable, or if perhaps we're charging less, or perhaps the other way. But it'll be interesting to go through that process.
The interesting thing, Ricky, is that your council is only one of the very few who are on site value. So you wonder, you know, capital value is obviously servicing those other councils, local government organisations very well.
I think the hardest part for us is it's very hard for us to get comparatives with other councils because we use a totally different system. So we've got no way of comparing like properties between Lower Eyre and Tumby because one's on site value and one's on capital. But having said that, even if we do compare, you've got to accept that it's going to cost more for us to deliver the same services because we don't have the economy of scale that Lower Eyre's got to the same degree.
If you were a farmer and you needed to strengthen your business model, what would you do?
Personally,
Broaden your
amalgamate.
base.
Yeah, well, I voted for amalgamation 20 odd years ago. You can see the writing on the wall then.
Just that really, I don't remember when Ian Pearson Street and Brian Fallow was in Lower Eyre. We were talking then pretty closely regarding amalgamation then. What brought us undone is exactly what Ricky said, because we were on site value and they were on capital value. And that was a major problem, sticking.
And now that it's being forced
Oh,
to shift,
next year, hopefully, we'll all
is
be
an
on the same.
opportunity.
We'll be all capital value.
I think every
Because farmers are comparing the property on one side of the boundary compared to the other side of the other council. It just wasn't going to work.
I think that's
Actually,
something
just
that,
on that, Hannah, from what Bob just said, is there a different rating you're seeing with the two different council areas, like Lower Eyre and Tumby Bay? Is there a different farm value on council rates in that process?
Well, they had capital value, we had. side
Yeah,
value.
but in the whole process, are they paying more or less than what we're paying, or is it the other way?
Find out.
You guys, yeah, we have to pay more in the Tumby Council than we do in DC.
So you pay more,
In Tumby,
oh, you do,
yes.
already out on the rural rate?
Yes.
You could take your valuation and use the rates of Lower Eyre plus their fixed charge to check the two.
But it comes back to that economy of scale.
Yeah,
it comes back to
does.
the dollar.
Yeah.
Like that.
That plus the different business.
Yeah, it's what the council.
And that's what you do, because you know that there are certain things that have to be funded.
Mm.
And there are plans, there are million plans, but you've got to work with that.
So
So I've
we
worked
just-
with that really well.
Just on that, Hannah, when I did some work here for our Ungarra
Yeah.
Road Committee here back in early 2000, looking at all the grants from governments around Australia to district councils, this area was one of the lowest funded per head of population.
Yeah.
Is that still the case, or?
Yeah.
I take what you're saying, Wendy, that do you think we're underfunded generally on the peninsula to what we should be?
We can always use more money.
True, but
But,
in
yeah,
comparison to
I
others.
think it's based on, Dion would explain it better than I could, but it's based on a formula.
A lot of it's
and
based on
your
population
capacity
is a lot of it.
to raise
Yeah.
rates.
Like Tumby Bay Council receives a lot less in general purpose grants than the councils northwest of us.
We don't get drought funding, but it also comes down to the fact that some grants, we obviously get the grants that Dion's spoken about tonight, but so the Causeway grant that we recently obtained, that was a 50-50 split. So a lot of grants require the council to put in half or maybe a bit more than half as a contribution. So at the moment, we're not in the position to contribute towards that, and therefore we can't get that grant. So yeah, it depends what's available and what it's being used for, but there are multiple factors that impact on us receiving that grant funding.
Certainly the general purpose grants from the Grants Commission and not so much the road one, but the general purpose one in particular, we receive a lot less per head than most of the other small councils on our peninsula. So once again, you've got an anomaly there. We have to deliver the same types of services, so the only other way we can do it is to put rates up because we get less grant funding.
Dion, just on that, do they give us less because we accept it and they just keep giving us
No,
less?
it's a statewide formula, so you can't. Well, I mean, we have lobbied in the past, but
Yes.
yeah, they review the formula from time to time, and they believe it's fair, and it's, yeah, that's probably about all I can say.
You have to look at downsides for some of our services.
If you want to write a list of the ones you think might get
Yeah.
away with,
I've
it,
raised that point to other ratepayers.
and every council I've been involved with since I've been there has looked at service reductions and have never been able to identify any that they
I think one thing I've learned as in my almost 8 years now is that for every challenge local government is faced, it's a potential opportunity of some description. It's always going to be a challenge, but yes, always has a potential. We've been here for a little while. I'm going to wrap it up soon, so maybe 5-10 questions left. Yeah, sure. Sorry, Graham.
Yeah, Hannah, I was just listening, we're talking about site value and when we change to a different rating system. Why will that make any difference to the amount of rates that people pay on average across the council? The council has to raise X million dollars out of council rates. So hopefully you would set the rate in the dollar so that you raise that amount of money. Some people's rates are going to go up, some people's rates are going to go down. But overall, it's not going to make any difference, well, it shouldn't make any difference to the amount of funds that the council raises through rate revenue.
That is correct.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's no great windfall,
No,
unfortunately.
it can't be. People can't afford it.
It's not the purpose of it.
There'll be a lot of capping rates. People's properties are capping the rates.
So one of the,
There'll be 200 properties that can be paid, council get a little cap.
so I won't,
Rates can't go up more, say more than 10%.
I won't quote numbers, but generally when a council makes a significant change to the way they rate, there can be big winners and big losers. So generally one of the levers that council can use to smooth that out is to have rate capping. So it might be that on average rates are going up 8%, but no one will go up more than 12%. So some of these values who, because of the changes, would have gone up 30%, they'll be capped at that 12% until they reach that equilibrium of the general rate.
But won't you have to
It won't
increase-
change the total amount of rates. You're 100%.
Thank you very much. You've got to get so much money on the rate and the dollar.
Exactly.
So we
So it
needed
makes no difference at
4.5
all.
this year, 4.5 next year, 5 maybe the year after. That's what
Yeah.
we take in what we need to run the business.
If necessary, yes.
Yeah.
If not necessary, it won't be done. Yes.
Yeah. Have I got more questions?
Yeah,
Please, Carol?
it's to Wendy, if you'll answer it.
Come and get up here, Wendy.
Do you want to
Yeah, you're on capital value, I'm doing.
No.
You're in. you're doing-
DCLP, I've got one farm and one property and one house,
Right.
but the rest is Tumby Bay.
Oh, sorry.
Site value and capital value impact on.
Yeah, no, what I was going to ask was what our rate in the dollar for rural is 0.0018007. I just wondered what you were paying if you're on capital value, you know, but you're not.
To be honest, I couldn't quote a figure because we pay the bill.
Yeah.
And it comes down to lower air might need to raise $8 million a year over so many properties as opposed to us at 4.5 over so many. It's such a different formula for every council. It's hard to go, oh, you do this and you do that. It's a bit like me trying to compare what I pay here to my property in Adelaide. You know, the councils are entirely different.
Anna, one question.
Yeah, Donald?
Does the council still feel, as they used to, that higher increase in site value within all the rateable land category, it was appropriate that most of the rate increase be collected from properties within that category? In other words, category section 4 is where most of the increase should. That was a council policy or what they had when they put out differential general rates. But I'm very pleased to see it's been taken outside. I gather.
So council's current position, which they're consulting on, is what's in the business plan at the moment.
Sorry, Dan.
Council's current position, which they're consulting on, is what's in the business plan at the moment, which is for a 8.7% increase on average from each of the 4 differentials.
I know, I just.
But it is only a draft at this stage.
That was a comment put in there last year, but I noticed the updated version has come out, which I'm very pleased.
What's, I don't know.
I think it's.
That sounds good.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Have we got any further questions?
So when does a draft become the fixed plan then?
26.
And what is that
So,
process?
so basically next week, written consultation, submissions close this Friday. So anyone that wants to put a written submission in has got up till Friday. Council will then meet, I think it's next Thursday night, to discuss the outcome of this meeting and any submissions they receive. They will then give me direction to go away and prepare a final draft, which I'll bring back to them for them to consider and potentially adopt the budget, adopt the business plan and declare the rates. So a fortnight from Thursday.
26.
Yeah, all going to plan.
July.
Dion, can I ask you one question, quick question? Motions that have been moved at council meetings as far as their rates and what is going to happen, because it's been moved and passed, can that be reversed when you do your final business plan?
No, you cannot declare your rate until you have, I think the process is you've got to adopt your budget. It's either your budget and your business plan, but they've both got to be adopted before you declare your rate. So you can discuss and have policy and philosophy and drafts about what you intend to do, but the final decision is when council moves that motion to declare their rates, which is a fortnight from next Thursday.
And I think has to occur before the 11th of August.
Yeah.
I think that's our last date under their local government.
You have to have
to do
your
that.
budget and business plan adopted and rates declared by that date. That's the cut-off date.
So legally, anything that's been passed at a council meeting could be reversed.
Well, anything that's been passed so far has only been in preparation for going to consultation.
Yeah. So they haven't
Everything
actually.
is just a draft.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I know I've said too much, but this is not a statement. Why can't the councillors get electronic copies of letters sent to council? When I was my first term at council, we had action correspondence and non-action correspondence. And there on those issues, he said that takes a staff member, it takes heaps of pages and nearly does in a printing machine. But these days, electronics, why can't councillors be? Because I feel sorry for all those ratepayers out here that would send letters into council, it used to be a period of action, non-action, and that got wiped out. So the ratepayers letter virtually got put in the rubbish bin, because only two people, I think, actually looked at the letters and decided whether anything needed to be put in your council minutes or not, and the rest were disregarded. Why can't we go back to, if these ratepayers have a concern and want to write it to council, I think they'd like to see the councillors actually see their concern. Why can't you just put it electronically to the 7 councillors?
So councillors receive a electronic correspondence list. So I can see that I've received a letter from Donald Bailey, or the council has received a letter, and I can request to have a copy of that letter. If a ratepayer chooses to send a letter in, if they just email, can I please have a copy of this sent out to all of the councillors? Generally, our staff will make sure that it gets to all of the councillors. Yeah. Generally, it will be electronic. If you can't email one in, if you even just write it out, I'm sure our staff, if you talk to the girls in the staff and say, hey, I'd really like a copy of this in everyone's pigeonhole, can you please photocopy it for us? I'm sure they'll make it happen. You know, we are here for the community. That is literally in the name of the business, is District Council of Tumby Bay. You know, that's the community. That's what we are. So, yeah, that's why we're here.
If you send them to council, we can also send it through the council's email system.
Yeah. Oh, that's the other thing. Is all of our contact details are on the council website. Yeah. Yeah.
I have one further question.
Yeah, sure.
Why wasn't something similar in consultation done in Tumby Bay, where the large proportion of your electors are?
So we rotate this meeting every year. So we make sure that it goes. Is it a policy?
Yes. So it's
So it's one of our policies where we rotate it. So I believe next year is at Port Neil. The following year we'll be back at Tumby Bay.
It should be reviewed when the majority of your electors are in Tumby Bay.
So as a council, we review that policy every 4 years, I would think, as part of coming into council. I believe it's been an action that council has always participated in since I was a kid. If the new council choose to review it, then they can, but we have to also consider that there are ratepayers who live out here, who live in Port Neil. They also have access to see it being streamed. It's not available until tomorrow due to the phone signal out here, but you know, every person in the community also has the potential to write a submission in, to talk to staff, to talk to councillors.
And the biggest attendance was at Port Mill, and then followed, and Tumby had one of the smallest attendance.
Yeah.
Which was rather amazing for the biggest numbers, so.
Yeah.
What went on there.
Generally find if there's a topical item in it,
Yeah.
you get better numbers regardless of where you are.
Mr. Garrett?
Jeff.
Jeff, sorry, I forgot your first name.
Yeah.
Still polite.
Years ago, there was councillors were allotted to awards.
Yes.
And then they did away with that. And then they arranged to have a bus to go out, and once, I think before budget, or I guess I'm not sure when it was they did it, but they went around and toured the whole council area. Every councillor was in that bus, was supposed to have been. And now I think they've done away with it.
Sorry, do you
They
mean
haven't
at the
done it.
start?
Cost cut.
Do you mean
No.
prior to the annual business plan?
Well, I
for the
don't know.
consultation,
whether
or do you mean as a council, or?
once a year, all the councillors, I think I'm right, Rob would probably know, went in a bus and toured and checked out the roads.
Yeah, so we do that as the start of every term. We do it, so I've done it twice now. At the start of each term, the council joins, we do our training together, we come out, we see the different roads, we learn about culverts, we see bridges, we go out to the CWMS ponds, we learn all sorts of things. So it is something that happens. Councillor Elliott missed out because she obviously came in the supplementary election, but it is something that the councillors do, and they do come over all of the roads. Our staff come with us and explain things, and yeah, it's really educational for councillors to really know what they're getting into as well.
Yeah, I just thought it was a tour just to see the condition of the road and where councillors can make up their mind what money should be spent in certain areas.
Yeah, I think to clarify that,
Yeah, that's what we've got.
most local governments have moved away from that basis of organising the works program, because the average councillor doesn't understand how much life a road's got left in it by driving over it.
Yeah.
We have asset data that dictates, we do condition assessments of our roads every 6 years, so we have data that tells us, and then that is ground truth by qualified staff who work on the roads 12 months a year. To expect that a councillor, and I'm not having to go at councillors, to expect a layman councillor to go out and say, look at a road, look at 50 roads and say, oh, I think that one's the worst, that one's second worst. It's just not a viable way to do business.
I think board planning years ago had better, if you're saying you have a concern about you see the council for that wall and probably get something done. Now it's just all put in one there, it's no wards at all.
No,
but they have merits.
I know Councillor Curtis was probably not, he sort of didn't agree with a lot of the other councillors, but before every council, he was in our ward, and before every council meeting, he would ring me up and just generally ask me what in that ward that I thought needed to be done, which I thought was a good decision.
Yeah, it was a more personalised service for sure. But that depended on the quality of the councillor you had allocated to your board. Now you've got 7 to choose from, you only had 1 then really.
Yeah, but there was 9 councillors, wasn't there?
9 then, yeah.
But I just want to remind you that I think those were abolished before I was even born.
Yeah.
So,
and Tumby hung on to it for a lot longer than most councils, to be honest with you.
And when I got into council in year 2000, I had more funding, and I couldn't substantiate why the rural people were paying 20% more in the dollar than the residential people. I went to Charlie Laurie because he was the instigator of it, and he said, in the ward funding system, more money was spent in the rural areas. And he was right, but that was debunked in 2010, done away with all before that. Well, the rate of dollars was the same then.
Done away with that.
Yeah, as well.
I think we're getting a little bit sidetracked. I know that Councillor Robert Randall wanted to speak to the crowd. So go for it if you like, and then I'll take some final questions and then we'll close the meeting.
I just wanted to explain, having sent out a newsletter, which was sent out this promotion discussion, and I'm happy to answer any questions regarding that newsletter. We've heard a lot from the staff tomorrow, and I appreciate the support the staff give us as elected members. But at the end of the day, it's the elected members of this council who make the decisions for the community, and we are the ones who are accountable to you for the sorts of services we're delivering, the sorts of decisions we take, and the sorts of final decisions that we're making in some areas. So in that sense, I think it's important that local elected members should actually have an opportunity to have some input. I guess pushing my way in a bit by putting news that are out, but it's important that we do that. And I've prepared something so that I can keep on track and not get sidetracked. And then perhaps I can answer any questions. Yeah, it's my personal opinion. It is my personal opinion that council's rating formula needs urgent attention. Now, I'm not talking about the capital value rating formula. I'm talking about the existing rating formula that we have been using since 2014. Council's rating policy, and number 5.22, was last reviewed in April 2021. And in it states in clause 7, as under business impact statement, the council considers the impacts of rates on all businesses in the council area, including primary production. In considering the impact, council assesses the following matters: the equity of the distribution of the rate burden, that all ratepayers receive broadly comparable services and are generally similarly impacted by the prevailing economic conditions, current local, state and national economic conditions, and expected changes during the next financial year. But the point that I pulled out specifically to highlight is supposed to be considering the changes in valuation of townships and primary production properties from the previous financial year. I don't believe we do that. It should be noted that the valuation data is purchased by the council from the Value General's Department when needed. Calculation of rates across this council, like all council, is calculated by the property valuation and multiplied by the rate return. This council, as we indicated tonight, this council uses site value as of the properties and the differential rating system: rural rating, township rating, commercial rating, and silo rating. A system that I believe causes unnecessary division between rural and township ratepayers. There is a better way, but that's for next year's debate. The policy document does not contain the formula that was set in place in 2014 and has been used annually ever since. That formula is it always collects 54% of the rate income from the rural sector, 42% of the income from the township, regardless of the variations in public valuations. For example, in 2021, township valuations dropped by 9%. So to compensate and make sure that we got 42% collected, the rate of the dollar was increased by 11%. Or take this year's calculation. Property rates in the rural sector, so property values in the rural sector, have increased by almost 27%. But to make sure that we collect only 54% from the rural sector, we've decreased the dollar rate by 14%. The newsletter I circulated was an attempt to begin discussion on why a review is needed before we set this year's council rates. Collecting 54% from the rural sector, 42% from the township is wrong, in my opinion. Since I have been on council, the rural valuations have increased by, rural valuations of property have increased by 64% in the last 4 years. Township valuations have increased by 2%. To meet the formula, the rate of the dollar in the rural sector has gone down by 30%, while in the townships, it's gone up by 9%. Earlier this year, Councillor Laurie and I moved a motion and imposed a formula that an improved formula be used. This would have brought the same fairness back into the rating formula. Our proposal would have increased the rural rate payments by just $396 on average for each property in the world. $396. Township would have had an increase of $0. And that would have been fairness at last, as far as I'm concerned. That motion was lost in the casting vote of the mayor. As you can see, there's two of us, two councillors and two councillors. 4-2 vote. The mayor unfortunately has to vote. The annual business plan that we're discussing tonight details an increase of $211 on average for each rural property will occur if it's adopted, and an increase of $108 to the townships. The single pensioner, the superannuant living alone, and there are many of them in our town, or the single income family on a wage must find the extra cash from their already stretched budget. None of them have the capability of writing off their rates as a tax deduction. Well, if you've got a profitable business, I'm sure you're paying tax.
Farmers have been paying tax over the last 4 years.
So they've been doing that. So it's time to sell your business.
Well,
It's a really right, is it?
It is imperative that we focus our attention on council's deficit budgets and the fact that we've decided to add 4% on top of CPI for the next 4 years. CPI is expected to be around 9% by the end of this year. It'll be 11% increase in paying next year. But that's crystal ball. But the whole thrust of this discussion that I'm having with the council is based on the fact that our valuation system is built on our property values. It's a standard system across the state, and whilst it's not ideal, it's a mechanism by which we can measure a person's ability to pay. So if you live in a large, expensive property, it's assumed you can afford to live there and pay higher rates. If you live in a smaller property and you're struggling and you've got a lesser property value, you pay less council rates. That's the way the system should work, not the way it's been working for the last few years. Happy to answer any
Thank you,
questions.
Councillor Randall.
So
Happy to answer any
is,
questions.
is that not what we're moving to by going to capital values? So,
No, I'm talking about this year's.
no, but it's pointless we're changing next
Why?
year. So why cause this division and carry on? The whole system rolls over next
I've asked,
year.
I've
we're all
asked you for
aware of that.
consideration. Putting a point of view that's different to what you've heard for the last 8 years. Point of view that needs to be expressed, and you need to consider us as
Thank you, Councillor
responsible
Randall.
rate.
Thank you. I might actually wind it up. Have we got any last questions about the annual business plan? Councillor Randall is more than happy to take phone calls and emails, I believe, and happy to meet with community members about his newsletter, about his speech tonight. Are there any further questions about the annual business plan, the draft annual business plan?
Emma, likewise, I'm available if people want to
Yeah.
ask questions.
Yeah, and just on that, can I ask Dion, is page 9 there, the figure that you're looking at for this year, is it like, is that?
Yes,
the
that's,
draft? That's it, okay. I heard what you said before, Dion, about money coming in and coming out. So at the end of the day here, if you're going to be over $1 million in debt, is that actually in debt, or is that the money's come and gone in different years?
that number, so the number that's in that statement there has to be discounted by about 600,000 because that's how much of our grants commission money we've received already last year.
Yep.
That actually applies to this year, which I think isn't it about 1.2 million in that document? So if you take, so if you take 600,000 off, you're at 625.
So it would be 600,000 so in debt or something.
Deficit, operating deficit, which
But at
is
the same time, the figure for this current year, in June this year, could be less than 600,000.
that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it comes back to 2 million.
Yeah. So you're better off to look at a 3 or 4 year average than an individual year. Yep.
Like Leon said, he's more than happy to sit down with community members, just ring the staff, make a time. Councillors and myself are the same. We are open until Friday afternoon for submissions. I really encourage everyone to sit down with your family, read the plan, write a submission together. You know, if you've got compliments, we love to hear them as well. You know, we also want to hear your criticisms. We want to know where we can do better, how we can do better. But also, there is an election coming up. So if you think that you can do better, if you maybe have an opinion that you think can help drive the community, maybe that's something that you want to chat to one of us about as well. So, like I said, 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock, Friday. 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
For close of submissions. So please, I really encourage you that is the best way to get your opinion across. is please just write a letter, and so we can sit down, we can read them, we can know your opinion. I think that is better than a Facebook post or a pitch with your friend at the supermarket or whatever it means. I can't talk about how important it is to write a submission if you're passionate about it and you want us to know your opinion. So please do write a submission. Thank you for coming, and I hope to see you all in the future.
And encourage people to stand for council.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need diversity on council, so.
Well done, Anna. Well done. And the council.
That one was that you were talking about.